Okay, we good to go?
Always good to go.
I'm just chilling at Canada Life Center.
That's the hard-hitting analysis you listen to the Level Flight podcast for.
Here we go.
Jets are a brisket team, low and slow for the first two periods, and boom, an explosion of flavor in the last few minutes of the third.
Doing all right. Better if my internet would work.
Elliott.
This is comedy. I'm Brian. I'm joined by Connor.
Hello.
And Elliott.
Hey.
Wow, that was fun.
You're listening to the Level Flight podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into episode 93 of the Level Flight podcast. We've got a full crew here today. My name is Connor, joined by Brian and Elliott. Fellas, how are we doing?
I'm doing fairly well. I'm still trying to get used to the new intro because I just start laughing every time. I was the one who put it together. Like, I've seen all these clips so much that I shouldn't be losing it every time I hear it. But no, I have to contain myself when we're coming back to starting the recording.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah. Oh boy, we're gonna recreate all the clips now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might
Clip
as
show.
well. I mean,
Exactly. We are going to talk about the Nikolaj Ehlers trade proposals. We kind of promised that on LFP Live. If you joined us last Sunday, that one of these episodes we were going to do that. Today's that day. We're going to hit off the top. We're going to talk about the Brenden Dillon news that just dropped. We're going to talk about the coaching update as the Jets continue to look for their head coach. And then we're going to go to break. Come back with some trade proposals for Nikolaj Ehlers if the Jets do shop him. Friend of the show, Murat is reporting that they are shopping him. So seems likely that he's played his last game as a Jet, but we will see. And then we might touch on the NHL playoffs at the end of it as the Oilers tied the series last night in what was a crazy game. But right off the top, let's talk about Brenden Dillon. Scott Billeck of the Winnipeg Sun had the first tweet on this. He tweeted out that he's here. Let me get the exact wording right. He said, "I'm told the likelihood of Brenden Dillon returning to the Jets next year is slim at best, and he will become a UFA. Sources say Dillon's camp didn't receive an offer and held no conversations regarding an extension during the season. He hasn't heard from the team since it ended." Then, let me just flip over to Murat, who I just brought up. He had a tweet on it as well. He said, "It's too early to be sure about Brenden Dillon's future. I understand that he's hopeful to sign, and I know that talks haven't started yet. Of course, it's only May 15th, and the Jets are engaged in a head coaching search. Dillon is valuable to Winnipeg. Let's wait and see." What were your guys' first reactions when you heard of this news? Brian, I'll start with you.
I mean, it's not exactly shocking. Like, there was obviously a level of frustration from Dillon in his postseason media conference. And when you have that level of sort of outward frustration, and then you don't see a follow-up report at some point that the Jets have, opened conversations, there's obviously going to be questions that come up based on whether or not that's a future fit. And so getting this report, whether it's too early or not, doesn't necessarily shock me. And I think it is true in the sense that it seems like a slim possibility, especially, we'll talk about this later. The Nikolaj Ehlers market, you'd think that the Jets are going to target a defenseman with him as an asset. So that will change things. As we mentioned, the coaching search will change things. So it is a wait and see, but at the same time, I still also think that it is going to be a slim chance that we see Brenden Dillon return next year, just given the current state of things and the fact that we have yet to see any sort of contract talks there.
Yeah, for sure. Elliott, what was your first thoughts when you read those tweets?
like Brian said, I mean, there's really no too big of a surprise here. Obviously, voices concerns. We'd heard throughout the year that Dillon was one of the only guys who hadn't been in talks at all with the team. So you kind of got a sense of where the direction of the roster was heading. And then, I mean, like Brian said, it all depends on how the Nikolaj Ehlers trade sort of pans out, right? So if they get a defenseman back, his days are probably over here in Winnipeg, just like Ehlers's would be. But I think also too, it'll also have to be about where the Jets, just in general roster construction, like even if they don't get a defenseman back for for Nikolaj Ehlers, Brenden
Yeah.
Dillon may still not return just because the Jets may want to take the roster in a different situation. It's so early in the offseason. They are very much worried about what head coach they are going after currently. They're trying to secure a head coach. And as much as Dillon probably wants to get the deal done, I'm sure the Jets probably aren't even talking to any players currently at the moment. They're probably all focused in on the search. So I'm sure if you asked any of the other pending UFAs or RFAs, they probably haven't been contacted either. So, I mean, this feels like it's a little bit of like, I don't know. There's not like a proper word for me to say here, but like this just kind of feels like on Dillon's part where it's kind of like he's kind of banging his fist a little bit here when he knows what the situation is. So he should be a little bit more understanding because it's a business, I get, and it's you have relationship with these people, and you want to get these things done. You like the city, but this is also a business, right? Things have to get done in a specific order. And for the Jets right now, priority number one, and as a player, you should understand that is there needs to be a coach for the team before you can put the players out there. So I don't know. It feels more like he's banging his fist a little bit at
I mean,
9 months ago, and I think the Jets are focused on other things. So I'm sure they'll come to him and let him know what they've decided. But right now, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that thought process from him though, because it's like you are told all season long how valuable you are to this team. You play a top 4 role, you play like 18 and a half plus minutes a night, and yet there's no talks of an extension. I mean, I've said many times on this podcast, I talked to Brenden Dillon in training camp and a month into the season, and he said that talking to some of the other guys who were pending UFAs, we haven't had contract discussions either. And then guess what? A month later, Nino Niederreiter extended for 3 years at $4 million, and boom, there's a guy that's showing the value to Winnipeg. We think you're valuable here. We offered you a contract. We stay here for 3 more years after this one. And Brenden Dillon's probably like, what's going on here? I thought I'd be getting this contract too. So it makes sense. He's a guy who's going to be coveted on the UFA market if he does hit it, because veteran physical defenseman had a great year on the second pair for the Jets. I would hate to see him go because he's been such a valuable part of this team for the last 2 seasons. That's the news on Brenden Dillon that just came out today. There's going to be a lot more on that. What we have been talking about for a few weeks now is the head coaching search. And we do have a bit of an update from Elliott Friedman on 32 Thoughts, who says that he thinks the Jets have interviewed former Minnesota Wild head coach Dean Evason, who had Elliott's making the gesture there, the bench interaction, let's say, with Rick Bowness last year when the Jets clinched a playoff spot. And then he also brought up the fact that Todd Nelson was an assistant when Kevin Cheveldayoff was in Chicago, and said don't count out the Jets talking to Todd Nelson as well. And the interesting part about that is Todd Nelson's still coaching. The Hershey Bears are still going in the AHL playoffs, so the Jets will have to wait maybe a month, maybe a few weeks, depending on when they get eliminated or win the Calder Cup again. That's when they'll have to talk to him. They'll have to wait. So maybe they are waiting for him to make their final decision. But that's an interesting connection there that Elliott Friedman brings up. Has your guys' thoughts on the coaching search changed a little bit? What do we think about Dean Evason? Brian, I'll start with you and these reports. What your first thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the coaching search is very much I love the reports. I need to see, this whole thing hashed out, right? Like the whole thing with Craig Berube, he's now interviewed several times with different teams. I think he's had 2 interviews with Toronto. I feel like with him, I've kind of cooled on some thoughts I've had on him. So I mean, I would still like the outside perspective. I think that's the biggest, benefit from him. But in terms of the other guys, seeing the fact that they might be interested in Nelson, obviously from that report, Todd Nelson is at the top of my list, I think, with what he could bring, and his track record, second to none. So I like that. Dean Evason for me has always been kind of like that middle ground candidate. He satisfies a lot of things that they're looking for in a coach, you can tell. But it's also, he seems like he could be a good coach for the group. And he doesn't exactly have, a terrible, record with dealing with younger guys. He's turned some guys into some legitimately great players. So there's a lot to look at there, but I need to see. The biggest thing for me is seeing sort of where they go from here. I'd love to see the Nelson thing. I would love to sort of hear that they're starting to maybe rule guys out, or other guys are getting hired someplace, so you can kind of narrow it down.
Yeah, I think the Berube thing for me is I like they interviewed him. Apparently, it was over Zoom. That was a Frank Saravelli report. That to me was just them doing due diligence, maybe getting some free advice from a guy who is so obviously going to Toronto. I think from the start of this, Berube has been penciled in to the Leafs. So I think that like it's cool that they interviewed him. That's good. You want that free advice. You want that consultation from a guy who's been in your division for the last 5 years. But I don't think that there's anything there in terms of him being the next head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. I think it's much more likely that a Dean Evison or a Todd Nelson is. Elliott, where are you at with the coaching search, and what were your first thoughts when you heard this report from Elliott Friedman?
I just think it's good. Like you want a little bit more of a cleaner sweep going through all the available candidates. Obviously, they've learned from a couple years ago where it was kind of like they were all in on Trotz, and then he obviously decides to take the smarter decision and be a part of a management group with the Predators. And then the Jets are kind of left with, okay, well, who's next? We didn't really look, right? So I think it's just encouraging for me that they're looking at all their options, whether Berube is penciled in right away with the Leafs, like if that's already a done deal and he's just kind of humming and hawing about it, then it is what it is. But I'm just glad that they are looking at all available candidates, trying to assess who the best option is for their future. Realistically, to me, a lot of these coaches that are available are all on that same middle tier where they're all good coaches, but I don't know if they and they may be the right coach for the current roster. There's no coach to me that I think where I'm at where it's like they're really the one that I want to go for. It's kind of like they're all in the same tier to me. So, I mean, if they're going to wait for Nelson, that's great. But at the same time, if you're going to wait for Nelson, well, one or most likely two of those other dominoes of whether that be Berube, Keefe, McClelland, who else am I missing? There's been another name that's been Woodcroft would also,
which we haven't heard anything about recently from anyone,
No.
which is interesting to me because the second that Sheldon Keefe became available, suddenly Woodcroft's name linked to the Devils job has faded entirely, and now it's like the Devils are all in on Sheldon Keefe. And so, which has me wondering, is Jay Woodcroft someone who the Jets maybe swoop in because the coveted jobs, in Jersey with that roster, in Toronto they're obviously going a different direction. Could he be someone that the Jets, interview later in the process and kind of get wowed by his philosophies on things?
Yeah, and Woodcroft and Keefe, I think, are very similar, or their teams play similar styles, which is why the Devils, who want to play that run and gun, dominate off the rush style, were in on Woodcroft, and then Keefe became available, so they want Keefe now, and then Woodcroft. Yeah, you make a great point. He's just kind of. We haven't heard anything. I think, the Todd Nelson news is encouraging. That Elliott Friedman is kind of floating out there that the Jets might be waiting for him because, in my opinion, he's my top candidate, or who I think would be the best candidate for the Jets to hire. Dean Evison, I was kind of getting sold on him being the head coach by Jacob Stoller, friend of the show. We were at the Kenny and Rennie event at TCB, and he was laying some wisdom on me about Dean Evison is the type of coach that coaches his teams the way the Jets want to play and the way the Jets wanted to play under Rick Bowness. So there might be a stylistic fit there, at least in the Jets' mind. Whether we think that there's a stylistic fit there may or may not be true. And frankly, it doesn't matter because the GM is going to pick who he thinks is the best fit for his team. And that might be Dean Evison, but we don't know. Unless we have anything else on the head coaching watch, let's go to break and we'll come back with some Nikolaj Ehlers trade destinations, proposals, what the framework of that deal might look like. We're good. Good to go to break.
All good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chilling. Okay, let's do it. Thank you for listening to episode 93 of the Level Flight Podcast. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back discussing some trade proposals for Nikolaj Ehlers.
Hey, Level Flight fans. you were probably just watching us chat something about the Jets, or who knows, it's, almost summer now, so we could be talking Gold Eyes, we could be talking Bombers, we could be talking Sea Bears. I don't know what we were talking about. What we're talking about now, though, as you wait for us to come back, is where you can find us when you're not watching or listening to these episodes. You can find us on social media. That's talking Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all of those platforms at Level Flight WPG. That's where you can find all of our content. You can sort of keep in contact with us. You don't have to worry about losing, an episode here or there. You can just keep up to date. With that in mind too, you should probably go and subscribe to our YouTube channel and click that little bell. If you do that, you will never miss another episode release, and you'll be right there for the premiere every single time it comes out. This summer, we've got a lot of stuff planned. We're going to do our regular sort of off-season stuff for the Jets. The draft's coming up, free agency's coming up, but we're also going to do our regular coverage into the other Winnipeg sports scenes. So, we've got a lot of content on the Gold Eye. Should be a great season there. Sea Bears are starting up soon. The Bombers just had, they're starting the rookie camp now. So exciting times ahead. So as you wait for us to come back, which we'll be back very shortly, think about that. Go subscribe, like this video, and just enjoy the rest of the episode. Follow us on all our socials, and I'm going to send it back to, us. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Welcome back into episode 93 of the Level Flight podcast. As Brian just said, hit the like, hit the subscribe button. If you're on podcast, rate and review.
Listen to me.
Listen to Brian. Exactly. Let's get into the Nikolaj Ehlers trade proposals that we wanted to talk about here. Let's start with kind of the framework. I know, Brian, you and I kind of came with more of the names. Elliott, you were kind of thinking more of the framework of a deal. Where are you at with just the thought of trading Nikolaj Ehlers, Elliott, and what that deal might look like as just a base for what Jets fans can maybe expect?
Personally, and in my opinion, if I were the actual armchair GM, which
you're Kevin Shoveled out for a day, go.
Yeah, if I was if I was Chevy for a day, I wouldn't.
You have arms on your chair.
Oh, there you go. True. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
Anyhow, if I were to be the GM, I personally wouldn't trade Nikolaj Ehlers. I think he's a very vital part of this team, and I think he's an important piece. But
that's option one. Because I agree.
That's option one. Option two, which is what Kevin Cheveldayoff seems to be going with, and the rest of the management staff, is to trade Ehlers. For me, I have the framework that I think really should be, and this will kind of go into where the other two guys are going to go into. I personally think, in my opinion, the Jets should either be getting a top four right-handed D back in the deal, and then either probably like a C prospect, maybe a B- prospect if you can get lucky, and maybe a draft pick. The other, and that would be, they get a draft pick if they were to get a top four D. With most likely the Jets would probably go with somebody with term, who has experience, who's put in multiple consecutive seasons of good play. If that is not the package that they get, then I would hope that the Jets would get a probably mid to late round first round pick, because Ehlers, as much as his value is, I don't think he is a lottery draft pick, probably, especially not a top 10 pick, unfortunately, as much as we value him very highly here. I would say it's probably a mid round to maybe late first, and then probably a B prospect for sure, which I would hope is a defenseman that is a more so 1 or 2 years away from playing. I would hope that first round pick would then be packaged with the Montreal second and or another draft pick to then go get a top 4D, but we don't have to talk about that. That would just be the kind of return sort of what I'm looking for. Personally, it's hard to get names because we're so early in the off season. We really don't know who's available, who's getting shopped, who is, there's so many question marks. That's just what I'm hoping is where the Jets are looking when they're making their calls. And I'll turn it over to the other two to tell you who they would hope would be those players coming back.
Some names. Yeah, no, but that's a really good kind of laying of the foundation of what a deal might look like, because you brought it up there too. We value Nikolaj Ehlers very highly on this podcast.
And what's the perception like outside of us?
But yes, there's a group of Jets fans also who are like, well, he has 4 goals in 37 playoff games. Well, you don't think a GM is looking at his hockey DB page and sees that too? Like, I think there's the perception of a team like the Seattle Kraken might value him very highly because they look at his analytics and his point production at 5-on-5 and things like that. And they have a very in-depth analytics department, and they might be willing to pay up for him, but maybe an older school GM might not, because they're like, oh, this guy's soft and he doesn't perform in the playoffs. So it's going to be a weird market, I think, for Nikolaj Ehlers, and that I'm bracing myself for a return that is underwhelming. But the names I'm bringing up today are not underwhelming returns, but I am still bracing for that. I just want to clarify that. I think that there's going to be a really weird market for him, given the dominance at 5-on-5 in the regular season and then the playoff struggles in a bit. Yeah. Brian, I'll start with you. Maybe throw out your first 1 or 2 names that you've been looking at that the Jets could target in a trade for Nikolaj Ehlers.
Yeah, and firstly, I just want to address the fact that I cannot be called an armchair GM because my chair does not have arms on it.
Okay,
so
good to know. Good to know. Yeah.
Just to
You're
put that
just
out
a
there,
chair
tell me
GM.
that you're wrong factually. But I'm going to start by linking a guy that has seemingly been on the radar for most Jets fans for the last couple of years. I think a lot of people were hoping that this was a supplementary move at the deadline. That didn't happen. But the first name I'm going to bring up here is Jakob Chychrun in Ottawa. There's been a lot of issues, I think, with that Senators team, to the extent of he is one of the guys that I anticipate wanting out. I don't think there's any desire for him to extend. He's got another year left on his deal. I don't think that as much as he's extension eligible, I think that we've reached a point now where I'm just waiting for him to get traded. And I think that this could be a fit. So my framework here is the Jets acquiring Jakob Chychrun, who has a 10-team no-trade clause with a year left on his deal. AHL forward Igor Sokolov, who is clearly one of those like change of scenery guys. He's 23 now, hasn't really been able to crack the lineup, but the tools are there. He's big, probably be one of those guys in the bottom 6, and a 2025 second-round pick for Nikolaj Ehlers and a 2025 third. So you're essentially pick swapping in that 2025 draft. So in terms of the players there, you're Chychrun and Sokolov for Ehlers, and then the pick swap to upgrade to a 2025 second.
Yeah, I like the framework of that deal. And also, I think another thing we should clarify, and I'll throw it back to you on whether or not this comes with an extension, but Murat in his article said that the market will change for Ehlers for the better from a Jets perspective if it comes with a PLD-esque extension in place. So the team that they're trading them to can
allowing teams to talk to him.
Yes, like the Kings did with PLD and signed him to an 8-year, $8.5 million deal. The Jets, if they allow teams to do that, the market goes up. So 100%. Brian, is that deal with or without an extension? We'll clarify that.
I think my mindset going into this was a lot of these teams don't make any sort of attempt to get the return that the Jets want unless there's at least the ability to discuss with Ehlers beforehand, because my other 2 things I don't think happen if they're just getting him for the single year. So I think that there's going to be, it seems like the perfect opportunity for the Jets to allow him to, come to the table with things. If they know that he's gone, give him the list of, teams that they're talking to. And if he so chooses, discuss extension with them, because otherwise I'm not sure, like even with Ottawa, I don't think that happens if they're not able to guarantee an extension there, because you're giving up a prospect that at one point was fairly highly valued, and then a top 4 defenseman for a guy that if he's only there for a year, it doesn't necessarily make sense.
Yes. Okay. Good. Thanks for the clarification there. I'll throw in one name that I think is unrealistic, maybe not unrealistic, but maybe more unrealistic than the other name that I'm going to throw up. And then I'll throw it back to you for your next name. Ryan Pulock from the New York Islanders is a name that right when the season ended, Jacob and I were talking about it, driving to games, like who are some guys, like Ryan Pulock was a guy that immediately came up. He's got term, I believe, until like 2030, 2031. He's 29 years old. just over $6 million on that contract, right-handed defenseman. He's got a full no move clause on the New York Islanders, which makes this more unrealistic than the other deal I'm going to talk about. But he is from Manitoba, Ryan Pulock. So maybe there's where is he? Dauphin? You were saying, Brian? It's Dauphin? Yeah, he's from Dauphin. So maybe there's a little bit of a hometown connection there that would make him waive the no move clause. But this is a disadvantage the Jets are at with like all negotiations. But I think he fits the mold exactly of a player that the Jets want, and that's a right-hand shot. Can eat up minutes on that top pairing with Josh Morrissey. You got the Manitoba connection that we know they love. And I think the Islanders could use another scoring winger. So there might be a framework around there. I didn't get into the specifics on that because of that no move clause. I think it's a little bit more unrealistic. But a deal that I did dive into a little bit more was Rasmus Andersson from the Calgary Flames. He's got $4.5 million on his deal for the next 2 seasons after this one. Yeah, 2024-25 and 2025-26. $4.5 million, no trade protection. He is 27 years old, so right in the middle of his prime. Top pairing, right-handed defenseman. The Jets would have to add to this. I think even with an extension in place in Calgary, the Jets would have to add maybe that 2025 third that you brought up, Brian, and maybe a B plus, like a Chaz Lucius-esque prospect. And you might think, wow, that's a lot. But right-handed defenseman, top pairing guys for $4.5 million in the middle of their prime, that is a very, very valuable asset. And then we talk about the weird market for Nikolaj Ehlers. I think it would have to be like Ehlers, Lucius, and maybe a second round pick, or they only have the second round pick this year. They don't even have it next year. So maybe a 2/3 or something. I think this would have to be a big deal. But he's the type of guy that would thrive with Josh Morrissey. That's a true number one pairing. And it would completely change the outlook of not only the defense corps, but the Jets in general, because that would be a massive addition. I think that one, if the Jets are making a blockbuster move, is more realistic than Pulock, simply because of the no move clause. But keep an eye out for Ryan Pulock, because I still think he would waive to come to Manitoba and play for the Jets, who have made the playoffs in a ton of years, or a few years in a row now. Brian, I'll throw it back to you, and then we'll get Elliott's thoughts on maybe what his favorite deal out of the ones that we've presented is. But Brian, what's another name you're looking at?
Well, do you have another one after the Anderson one as well?
Like maybe I kind of have one,
because I have 2 more. I wanted to keep it even.
Okay. Hold on. Maybe bring up one, because I'll bring it up. I bring up the Kraken all the time when it comes to the Winnipeg Jets, and people aren't gonna like this, but this is the weird market for Nikolaj Ehlers. I just brought up Rasmus Andersson. Now I'm gonna bring up Adam Larson, the guy that went 1-for-1 for Taylor Hall, and that will forever follow him in his career. But hey, he's a top 4. He's a middle pairing, right-handed defenseman. The Kraken might be willing to do that. He's got a modified no trade clause, and in Seattle, not sure if he'd waive it for Winnipeg. Again, this is the Ryan Pulock thing I brought up. You have to clarify that all the time. He's got 1 year left at $4 million. He's 31 years old. So I think the Kraken would have to add to this a little bit, just because as kind of a middle pairing guy who doesn't have an extension in place on the wrong side of 30, I think there's more that needs to come from the Kraken side on that. But I've just always had this attachment to the Kraken when thinking Nikolaj Ehlers trade destinations, because their like analytics department just lives in my brain. And I think if you look at their cap friendly chart, it's Adam Larson as a right-hand shot. Will Borgen has 1 year left at $2.7 million, and then Justin Schultz is a UFA. So there's not many right-hand shot defensemen there. But maybe they go for a Jamie Oleksiak, who has 2 years left at $4.6 million and a full no move clause. That's a little bit more unrealistic. Or a Brian Dumoulin, 1 year left, 32 years old. But again, I think the Kraken would have to add to all of those. But that's my Kraken picks, just because I feel like I have to make one, because I bring it up every time on every episode. But now I'll throw it back to you. End it off with your 2 guys, and then we'll throw it to Elliott on what his favorite one is.
Okay, so spinning off of what you said there, this is also a Kraken centered deal, but
Okay.
I focused on the fact that aside from Larson, I don't see any sort of great option for the Jets to follow up on. And my thought is they're aware of how much scoring they're losing when they lose Ehlers. I think they're also aware that Seattle will value him highly given their, analytical background as an organization.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I went the forward route here, and I said Jared McCann is a player that I would want to look at here. And the full framework that I went, because that's the thing, I went all in on this. I put on my GM hat briefly.
Okay.
So I said the Jets will acquire Jared McCann, who's 4 years left on his deal, and defensive prospect Ville Ottavainen, who is currently playing in Coachella Valley. He is a 6'5", 220-pound defenseman. He had, I believe, 34 points in 70 games this year. He is in his early 20s, and you're getting a defensive prospect. And then I had Ehlers packaged with that 2025 third again, because I think that the McCann-Ehlers swap, in terms of true value, you get a little bit more from Ehlers. So when you attach that, big defensive prospect that I know that the Jets would covet, I think that you would get a little bit closer there. But I have loved Jared McCann for quite a while. I found that in Seattle with, Dave Haxtell as the coach there, up until the very end, he was very much still underused. I thought that he was someone who should have been far more active in their system, but he has constantly been a underlying numbers darling for the last several years. His on-ice results have finally started coming around and getting closer to where they would average out. But I truly think that he would be someone who could feature heavily in the Jets' middle six, even the top six, I would say. And with there's still uncertainty that Monahan might not come back, he could be your second line center, and you would be just fine, if not better. And then for my second deal, before I let you guys chime in on here, this feels very unrealistic. Also because it seems like there's some sort of ire between the teams. But a name that I thought of this morning actually was going down to Vegas with Shea Theodore. And I bring up Shea Theodore because he is 1 year out from hitting free agency. The Knights just signed Noah Hannafin to an 8-year deal. They've got a bunch of guys who are going to be coming up for contracts soon. Jonathan Marchessault is probably walking this year. There's a kind of a perfect storm of they're going to need some extra scoring. They're probably not going to be able to re-sign Shea Theodore to what he'll want in a couple of years because of their cap issues. Because of right now, I believe Vegas has $92 million against the cap. And I think that this could be an opportunity for Vegas to allow for a swap of offense they're going to lose a little bit of their offensive game from the back end, but they're going to gain it in the form of Nikolaj Ehlers, and I'm certain they would use him in a role that would, give him the opportunity. And, he's making 5.2 for another year. He's played on either the first or second pairing his entire time in Vegas. And it felt like to me, he could be the opportunity for the Jets to increase that, puck moving ability in their top four. And from that, I would just immediately say that would be a Jets win. I just don't know if Vegas does it.
Well, I don't know. I think Vegas, what won't they do? Right. In a deal, they would do everything. And I think the thought of Nikolaj Ehlers, breaking through his playoff woes in a series against the Jets is something that I don't want to think about right now. But Shea Theodore is a player that can play on that middle pairing, maybe even the top pairing with Josh Morrissey, another puck mover. I've got the J Fresh card up here. Offensively, very gifted. Defensively, a little bit of work to do there, especially since it's a pattern if you look at the last 3 years. But puck movement was something that killed the Jets in that first round against the Avs. And Shea Theodore, is a Stanley Cup winner who is a very good puck mover, and that is something that they can hang their hat on. Elliott, what of all of those deals do you think is maybe the most realistic, or maybe the one that you would entertain the most? Putting your armchair GM hat back on, which one do you think is the most realistic and the best from a Jets perspective?
I think if we want to talk best from a Jets perspective, I think it's Rasmus Andersson, because you're shedding $1.5 million in cap space technically, right? Ehlers still has a year left. You're shedding a little bit of cap space. It gives you a little bit more room going forward. You still have to pay. I was actually looking. They still have the Blake Wheeler dead cap from the buyout that they have to. I believe
this year.
that's still on the books. You're gaining a little bit of space. You're also then getting, like Connor, you said, a bona fide first pair, right? And not that a guy like Theodore wouldn't do that or Pulock. I just think Rasmus Andersson has the potential of the Jets also signing him to a longer deal as a quote unquote second contract with the team once his deal is up, being at 27 and his deal being done at about 29, 30 years of age. I can see the Jets signing him on for another like 3-year deal after that, right? So I think that's kind of where I'm at with that. I think the most realistic, I don't know if Anderson is the most realistic.
Right.
I think a deal with Seattle, like maybe an Adam Larson, feels like the most realistic deal. But I think the deal that I'd be the most happy with would either be Anderson, or if we could get a decent enough package back, like Theodore plus, maybe. Like if we could get Theodore plus a pick or that sort of thing. I know, like Connor, you said you'd have to pay to go get Anderson. You'd actually have to give Ehlers plus. But I personally would be okay with that because you're getting a guy who's younger with term, and he's gonna help your team out as a whole, right?
Yeah.
So and sorry, yes, and the cap space also. You gotta pay for that cap space. If a team is taking on more money for a player, then teams know that, and so they're gonna ask for more, right? So I just think that's kind of where I kind of gauge it with in terms of. I think the deal with Calgary would be my personal favorite. I think I'd be the happiest with that deal. I'd also be okay with Theodore. Don't know if Vegas would do it. And then I think Larson feels like the most realistic, where the Jets trade Ehlers for Larson and you get a prospect and a pick back. So I don't know.
Yeah, and
personally for me, I think the Pulock deal, as much as I like Ryan Pulock, I just think that contract is just it feels too much.
I don't like that deal.
Really?
I think realistically that contract feels like by year, like there's 7 years left. By year 3 or 4 of that deal, you're really regretting that contract,
But
whether the Jets have done anything or not. And then you're in the same situation that you're going to be in with, you already have to deal with Scheifele and with Hellebuck, where towards the end of that contract, you're looking at it going, well, we can't trade it to anybody because nobody wants this $8 million, like $6 million, and I know it's a little bit of different. There's $2 million in cap space difference there, but I think for Ryan Pulock at 34 years of age, probably has different value than right. Like it's just hard to say. And then you're probably looking at another buyout where you go, okay, that deal was really good for the first couple of years, and then oh god, it got really bad, similar to a Blake Wheeler situation.
Yeah, I do also think like when Connor Hellebuck's 37 years old, it doesn't really matter. Like Pulock, I've got his J Fresh card here. It's not the prettiest, but again, I think in the top 4, he's an asset, and at $6 million, he could either play with a Josh Morrissey, who's a puck mover, and can maybe up that offensive number there. And he's a defensive player. The 2023-24 had a great defensive season by the analytics. So I'm not going to sit here and act like I watch a ton of Islanders games. I have been impressed with the minimal games I have seen with their defense core with Romanov and Dobson and Pulock. But I don't think that the $6.2 million deal 4 years from now is the biggest worry. I think the Jets are, if you're trading Nikolaj Ehlers, like either you're trading him for a first round pick, like you said, Elliott, and kind of resetting and having a youth movement, or you're trading him for someone like Ryan Pulock, who's going to step in and hopefully help you win right now.
I also think that if you go for an Anderson too, it allows you, like I mentioned with the cap space, that's more space that you can go and continue to add to the roster, whether that be on the back end or whatever the case is. I think if you go with a Pulock, it's kind of like, hey, you're locking in this defensive core that you probably got to play a young guy, right? Like I know the Jets are probably playing a Ville
Pionk and Schmidt are gone next year though. So after next year, who's under contract? Who's under contract after next year? Sandberg, Morrissey.
I just think Pulock, at least for next year, makes things really difficult, and you really got to pick and choose who you're signing in terms of salary cap space.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Right.
if after next season you've got Morrissey, say Pulak, Sandberg, Heinola, Salamonson, random dude, that's a decent six. Like Salamonson at that point is
I
what,
have his
22?
jersey.
A random dude, yeah.
Yeah, it's
No,
next
but
to my future considerations jersey in my closet.
yes. I don't think with Schmidt and Pionk coming off the books next year, I don't think that contract is going to hurt as much 5 years.
It may not.
now.
Yeah, it may not.
That's $11 million coming off the books next year, 12 million almost in Pionk and Schmidt.
Unless the Jets do something else with that money, which I would hope.
Unless
they would do
Pionk
it.
has another
Yeah.
contract year explosion and they sign him to another $6 million 4-year deal.
We're not getting into this.
Please
It's a
don't.
problem, yeah. That it's a problem. All right, well,
Yeah.
that was I think really good. We outlined the frameworks, even presented some deals, realistic or not. We will see, but that was a fun exercise looking across the league at some defensemen, some forwards that the Jets could target for Nikolaj Ehlers. Unless we have anything else, let's get on out of here. We're up over 40 minutes again. All three of us, we're going long now. It's a
Gotta
new
rein it
thing.
in.
We're going back to long episodes.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of long episodes, you may be wondering about the status of LFP Live on Sunday. Unfortunately, it has been ruled out. It went from questionable on LFP Live to doubtful on Tuesday's episode. It still hasn't practiced all week, as Brian has been saying, and it is now out fully. It may a long weekend. Enjoy the weekend. We're going to be enjoying the weekend. That's why we won't be able to do it. But we will be back next Sunday. And yeah, we appreciate the support listening to episode 93. Thank you so much. And we will see you next Tuesday for episode 94. And then obviously next Sunday, the grand event, as it always is, LFP Live at 9 a.m. So hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and drop a like on this video so you don't miss videos like this in the future. And fellas, any words on the way out?
I just want to sort of echo what you said and say, enjoy the May long weekend. I know a lot of people get a lot of work done too in terms of like setting up, cottages and spending time with families. So it's going to be just sort of a bit of a reset week for a lot of people, and I think for us too. And obviously, we want to be there doing LFP Live, but got a lot going on. So I'd rather take the week rather than us try and rush and have the very grainy video from me at the lake. So
exactly. Elliott, any words on the way out? Episode 93. No.
Enjoy the weekend. Go see Bears, and when we're back, CBL will be underway. So I'm gonna be 10 toes into all that stuff. So
yeah, that'll be great. Next week on episode 94 and 95, we'll be talking a lot of Goldeyes and Sea Bears. The Goldeyes just won back-to-back games, 16-0 and then 9-0. So the Bats are heating up there. And then the Sea Bears, their season opener is the 22nd, home opener on the 24th. So really looking forward to next week and all of those games starting, all the sports starting. The Bombers have a preseason game on the Monday of May long at like 3:30 or something. So there's Winnipeg summer sports are getting underway, and it's an exciting time for all three of those teams. So join us for episode 94 and 95, and we will break down what is happening with all three of those teams. But let's get out of here. We're already going too long. Thanks for listening to episode 93. Enjoy the May long weekend, and we will see you next Tuesday. See ya.
peace.